So let's get started. So my name is Nestenius. I work as a freelance consultant, a trainer and coach, and I help companies all around both in Sweden and outside and do training and consulting and coaching. We focus on architecture, .NET, C# and authentication. I also do a blog about authentication and security on my blog at nestenius.se. So if you want to read more about my writings, feel free to go to that site. I'm also co-organizer with .NET Skåne, together with Mats in Frontier, who is one of my co-organizers. So we have a local meetup for .NET developers here in Skåne, and we try to do one meetup once a month in Malmö or Lund or within this region. So what's the goal of this talk? I want to talk about authentication because I've been quite heavily involved in for example, on Stack Overflow, answering questions about authentication and security and similar. And I wanted to be in this talk try to kind of clarify some of the misconceptions and how authentication works under the hood in ASP.NET Core. So let's say we have this kind of simple demo application. We want to kind of display the name of the current user. We want to be able to sign him in and sign him out. And let's try to look at how does this work under the hood? How do we get the name of the user onto the page? So to do that, we can on the page in our kind of we can use the kind of user object. We can get the user identity and then the name and display it on the page. Okay, that makes sense. But that user object, that is a claims principal. And I think many times when you see that claims principal, what is that? I mean, how does it work and what does it contain and what is it? I think the name is a bit kind of weird, claims principal. What is it? Well, it's not that mystic if you look under the hood. So if you look at the source code of a claims principal, we see it's a collection of identities. Okay, so you can actually have multiple authentication and multiple identities at the same time when you're signed into an application. Okay, that's fine. But what is a claims identity? So a claims identity is another object, and that contains a set of claims, a list of claims. Okay, so then, of course, the question is, as a beginner, what is a claim? Okay, so a claim is a collection, is a key value pair, and your identity contains a list of claims, and each claim is a key value pair, strings, and it could be anything you like. Some claims are a bit more standardized, like the sub or subject if you're using OpenID Connect, for example. But you could name them and you could contain it. It could contain anything you like. So that is a claim. So then the question is, who creates this claims principal object? No, who sets it and who creates it? Well, we need to kind of go back down into the kind of internals of ASP.NET Core and look at the request pipeline to explore how things work under the hood. So under the hood, we have this classic request pipeline with middleware modules, and we can configure this pipeline and add modules to it and each module can contain different kind of functionality. So when a request comes in, our Kestrel web server will create an HTTP context object, and then that object will move through this pipeline of middlewares to the kind of final middleware, and that is typically the MVC middleware. And that one will kind of render this page, and then that page is kind of moved into the context object, and then it's on the way back. It goes through the middlewares once more, and then you get a response back to the browser. That's how ASP.NET Core works, and I hope that is pretty kind of familiar to most of us. So in this kind of request pipeline, we have an authentication middleware that we can add to this pipeline. And its job is to look at the incoming request, to look at the incoming HTTP context, and try to figure out who is the user and if a valid user is found, it will then create this set the user object and create this claims principal, and then all the middlewares after the authentication middleware can figure out that, hey, this is Bob. I hope that makes sense. So the question is, where does the data come from? And typically the data comes from the cookie. It can also be from an access token or a certificate or some other source. But in our case, the data for the user comes from the cookie. And we will talk more about the cookie later on. So in my demo application now, I want to add the authentication middleware. So in Visual Studio here, I have a simple application, and it's a classic MVC. I do have some content added to it, but basically, simple application. But it's not configured for any kind of authentication right now. So what we will do is we will add this add authentication. So at the start of our kind of configuration part, we add the authentication, we register the authentication services and middleware to the DI container, and then we add the middleware use authentication like that. Just to be explicit, so we add it to our pipeline, and we can run the application, but nothing really will happen right now because we're just going to add the kind of plumbing, but it's not configured, so not much will happen if we try to do anything. So we have added this middleware to the application. So what's next? So we need to look at what's inside the authentication middleware. So inside it, we have a set of handlers. And we add those handlers to the authentication middleware using the kind of add cookie, for example. We might use the add JW2 bearer handler, or we might add both cookie and OpenID Connect. So we can add one or more authentication handler to this middleware because the middleware is currently just empty in our application. So we need to add an implementation, that describes and have some functionality. So in our application here now, we will add the cookie handler. We set the login path, logout path, and maybe access denied path. We add it to our current application, just to build it up from scratch. So we copy this code, we go back to my application and just, add this thing. Perfect. So we had added the authentication, we added the cookie handler to this authentication middleware, but still it does not do that much, so we need to do a few more things. So what does the kind of those handlers do? And so when we work with the authentication middleware, it supports 5 different operations. So we have authenticate, and that operation will, by default, look at the cookie and then try to figure out who are you. And from that, if it succeeds and it gets a valid cookie, it will create this claims principal operation. So the authentication middleware only have those 5 basic operations. And it is up to the kind of cookie handler in this case to implement those 5 operations. Some handlers do all 5, some other handlers do just a few of them. It's up to the implementation of the handler which one to support. So authenticate is executed on every incoming request. It will evaluate, look for the cookie or token or something else, and then try to establish the identity of the user, if there is any. Then we have sign in, and that is more like remember me. So when someone calls a sign in, then the cookie handler will, in this case, set the authentication cookie. And obviously, when we do a sign out, it's all about forgetting the user. We remove the cookie. Pretty obvious. And then we have a forbid. So in this case, you come into the site, you are authenticated as a user, but you're not allowed to access a given resource. So the kind of your page or the authorization middleware might choose to forbid you. So then a call is made to the forbid kind of operation, and that one will typically redirect you to a, you're not allowed page. Okay, that's pretty simple. And the challenge operation is that you come into the site, but you don't have any kind of valid identity. You're anonymous. And that in that case, if you need to be authenticated to access a given resource, then your logic can choose to challenge the user to ask him to go please and log in, please go and log in somewhere. And in our case, if we use a cookie handler, it will redirect you to the login page. So those are the 5 very simple operations that the cookie handler does for us in our case. So in our case, so what we want to do in our kind of demo application, we want to protect this secure page. We want to, you must be authenticated to access this secure page. So how do you do that? Well, to keep it simple, we will in the kind of action method for this page add the, are you authenticated? If not, let's challenge the user if you're not signed in. So we add this to the code, and we copy it to Visual Studio, and we go to the secure controller here, and we add this logic. So we can restart the application, and we can go to this page. So now when I go to the secure page, we will see that we are redirected to the login page. We see in the URL up here, we come to the user login, and it also includes the cookie handler will append the return URL, where did we come from, to the query string to this page. So I could use that to then go back to where I came from if I want to do that. So that is good. We have protected this page, but our login is not currently working, so we need to address that next. So let's continue. But before we kind of go into the kind of sign in of a user, we also should be familiar with the concept of schemes. So we can, in our authentication handler, have one or more authentication handler installed in our authentication middleware. So what are schemes? Well, so let's say we have 2 authentication handlers, and in this case, when we call challenge async on that given user, we need to kind of decide who should kind of handle that operation, because only one of them should handle a given operation. So we need some mapping between the kind of incoming request and the call, which one should handle, what operation. So in this case, we use the concept of schemes. So a common kind of configuration is when we use OpenID Connect. Then we have 2 authentication handlers. We have 1 cookie handler and 1 OpenID Connect handler. So we first of all give each handler a name. They do have a default name, but it's always nice to be explicit about what the name is to make it more clear. So we name the cookie handler cookie, and the OpenID Connect handler, we call that one OIDC, for example. And then we can, in our kind of authentication configuration, define which one will do what operation. And when you do OpenID Connect, you only want the challenge to be managed by the OIDC by default. That's the kind of core purpose when you use OpenID Connect. And then we do let the cookie handler handle the rest. That's the kind of common configuration when we use those 2 together. So that is scheme. So in our case, back to our application, there's also an option to set the default scheme. And in our case, we only have 1 handler. So let's be explicit. So we name a cookie, and we say that the default scheme should be cookie. So we do that. We just copy this code. We go back to my application and program class, and we just kind of, add this just to be clear about what the intent is. Doesn't change anything, so we don't need to kind of run it again right now. So far So good. So next, okay, we have a login page, but this does not really have an implementation yet. So we need to look at how do we sign in the user to this application. So we want, somehow that the login page, when you click on login, you call the sign in operation on the cookie handler so that it can, sign in the user and then you can access this secure page. That's our kind of next goal. So how do we do that? Well, we have our kind of login view, that the first one displays the login form, and then you have the post back. When you click on the login button, you come to the second method. Okay, that makes sense. And there's a general rule, but it should be like a post. Of course, it's a form post to the login kind of action method. And we have a simple login model class that contains a username, password, and maybe where you should go back to after you have signed in. So we have this kind of helper model object as well. So what we do in the login action method? Well, first we do a simple validation of the username password. You look up in the database to find the correct user, and we leave that for later. But we need to do some validation, of course, and then we need to load the facts about the user and build up a list of claims into a collection of claims. And it could be name, email, roles, and similar. Okay, so that's good. So what do we do next? Well, after we have the claims, we put those claims into a claims identity. So we create the identity, we put in the claims in it, and it also includes a few extra parameters like authentication type. And authentication type describes, how did the user kind of sign in. And there's a few options for here. You can, it's just a string, but it tells the the logic, but you can also ask, how do you authenticate? Was it like a Windows authentication or cookie or token or some other kind of scheme? So we can, that might be like an authorization rule. How do you authenticate to gain access to some feature? And also you can define what is the name of a name claim and what is the name of a role claim. That also you can specify in this identity object. Okay, so we have an identity, but we need a claims principal. So we take this identity and place this identity, one or more identities, into this claims principal object that we talked about before. Okay, so we have a principal, but how do we get this principal to be signed in? Well, what we do now is we can first, define another object called authentication properties, and that contains like additional metadata surrounding this authentication attempt, like IP address or computer name or maybe some secret key, summer 2024 was best password, whatever you like. It might be some you want to add that you should remember about this user sign-in. Because the claims, when I go back here, the claims are more like, about the user, and the authentication properties allows us to add some extra metadata around this user. How did we sign in? Or, you might need it in the future. And then you call the sign-in async method. You pass in the claims principal, you pass in this optional authentication properties, and also optional, if you want to, the scheme of the handler that should handle this sign-in operation. You can explicitly choose. So in our case, we will add that to our kind of login page. So we copy this code, the same as I described. We go to our user controller and we go up here. We place this code here with all of this. So, okay, that's good. So if now start application, and we try to access our secure page, we are challenged. So we are redirected to the login page, and the login page now will, create the claims principal and sign in the user. And we see that we are signed in. We can access the secure page. All is good. We are really secure now. We can also click on the Hello Bob up here and display the facts that we can tell, that we can, get about this user. So we can get the, authentication type. He is authenticated. His name is Bob. We know that. We can see the list of claims that we passed in before. That's good. We can extract those from the identity. And also we see those authentication properties. And these properties are the ones that I kind of added to the authentication properties. But the cookie handler will also added the additional ones like issued and expire. So this kind of user will expire in like 2 weeks time ish. So that's good. We are kind of signed in. Perfect. So what's next? So then you might kind of wonder what happens when we do a sign in. Anyone who wants to make a guess? What happens when we do a sign in? Create a cookie and something else. Do we do something else or a redirect? Yes. So what happens if what we have is we have our ClaimsPrincipal object, we have our authentication properties, we take those two objects and we place them in a new object, of course. We like abstractions. So we create an authentication ticket. And I think you might have seen an authentication ticket. So it's actually a combination of, it's a container for the ClaimsPrincipal of, say, authentication properties and also the name of the scheme that handle this kind of sign-in. So that is kind of packaged up in a ticket. And then that ticket object is encrypted to ensure that, it's safe. And then that encrypted ticket is placed in the cookie into the browser. And optionally, we do a redirect, as one of you said. That is what happens in our kind of cookie handler. Not much, but still, very simple. So, okay, so that's nice. And no, it's encrypted. I will come to that. So right now, so just to answer your question, I was prepared. So what's inside this authentication cookie? Because right now, so I can actually use a tool like Fiddler to look at the traffic, and I can just log out, and then I will okay, we don't have a logout right now, but we can actually look at the cookie. So the cookie, if you look at Fiddler, we can look at the cookies here. So right now it's a bit kind of, hard to extract here, but this cookie right now, we can actually look in the browser. So if I go to the browser, I can look in the applications. We see that we have our kind of authentication cookie here. And if I try to, so this cookie here is encrypted, securely encrypted. And that is done by a separate kind of subsystem in ASP.NET called the Data Protection API. And that's a totally different story, but that's a very interesting module as well. And if you want to know more about that one, I do a lot of blog posts about that on my blog. So if you want to know more about encryption, you will find more there. But you might, think that that cookie is just base64 encoded or similar. So we could actually try to decode it. But if you try to do that, it's just random stuff. It's random. So it's not base64 encoded or similar. It's encrypted by strong encryption and encryption key and similar, because we don't want the hacker to be able to modify the cookie, of course. But still the question is, what is inside this cookie? Anyone who want to make a guess? Expiration time, yes. What else? Yes, authentication ticket. It is inside the cookie. But how can we see, how can we peek inside this cookie? Can we do that? It's encrypted. So yes, of course, we can do that. So what we can do, we can actually replace this encryption with my encryption. And my encryption is the world's best encryption, meaning no encryption. So we can actually, in the cookie handler, replace the encryption kind of logic with my own encryption. So what if I create my own kind of protector class that, so when we want to protect it, we just return it as it is, and when we unprotect it, we return it as it is. So what happens if we introduce this one? Okay, because I really think it's important to understand what is actually inside the cookie so that you can troubleshoot it and have a better understanding of how it behaves. So in this case, we copy this class to my application. So in my program class, I just add it at the bottom here. I just quickly add it. And I also add this option to configure the cookie handler. Sorry, needs to copy this one. I copy that one and I place it in here. So I start my application again. I go to the browser tools and I clear the cookies because yes, there's nothing here. Good. I go to the secure page. I log in. I set a cookie. So right now I can actually copy this cookie. I can now go to base 64, decode it, because it is base 64 encoded, but not encrypted. So if I decode this cookie, we now see that, yes, it's not JSON or XML, but it's some binary serialization, and that's fine. But we see clues, what is actually inside it. So we can actually verify and prove that what is inside the cookie is exactly the claims, the authentication ticket I created before is placed inside the cookie. So the cookie, in this case, is like a hotel key. So that key gives you access to the hotel room, and the ones who have this cookie can use it. Does it make sense? Any questions on that? Yes. Yes. Okay. So if a hacker steals the cookie, you're kind of toast. So the question is, what happens if someone steals the cookie? Yes, if someone steals the cookie, then you're kind of game over. That's how cookies work. So there's no kind of constraint or limitation to that ties the cookie to my machine, for example. The encryption key is unique per deployment, so it's not a shared key that it's not like a fixed machine key, encryption key. So the key is managed by this data protection API, and you need to configure it properly for production. So because by default, when the system starts up and it can't find a key, it will create one for you. So it kind of is pretty kind of automatic, but you need to configure it in production to make a successful deployment. But it's the key is unique per kind of setup, you could say. So this proves that inside the cookie is my total kind of authentication ticket, all the claims, all the facts, and that's the only thing that is used to create the ClaimsPrincipal object that I later can view up here when I display the user details. So all of this information comes from a cookie. Does that make sense? Any questions on that more? Good. So that is really important to understand. Everything is inside the cookie here, the entire authentication ticket, but in an encrypted safe form that it's really, really hard to get to decrypt. But next, in our application, we can't sign out at the moment. We need to handle that. So how do we do that? Well, what we want is that when you click on the logout button, you want to call the sign out async method. Okay, that makes sense. And that one will call the sign out, method on the cookie handler. That makes sense, I hope. And that one will actually delete the cookie. by setting it again with a date, expire date in the past, that will instruct the user, that will instruct the browser to please remove this cookie. So what we can do is that we can add this logic to the logout button. So we go to the secure controller. We have our kind of user controller. We have a logout here. So we just call sign out cookie. Sign out from the cookie handler. We will start the application. And we should see that we can try to access the secure page. We log in. We are logged in. Perfect. We call logout. We are logged out. But right now it's pretty sad experience. We just get a blank page. But if I go use the back button and reload, we are actually logged out. So the logout works, but the logout after authenticate, after, we're not redirected somewhere because we just get a plain page here. So we need to kind of figure out why are we not logged out, because we had set in the cookie logout path. I want to go to /user logged out when I sign out. That makes sense, obvious, but it does not work. Anyone who have a suggestion? I say? No, web page do exist. So, no. We want to redirect. We want something to happen after we sign out. We want to be redirected to somewhere else. So right now it does not work. We have set the logout path. It looks obvious, I think, but it does not work. So you Google Stack Overflow, and you hear that you find something. Maybe look, there's some option that you can actually. That the cookie handler can also look for the return URL from the query string. So you try that thing, let's try to add that to our kind of logout link to see if that works. We want to do this redirect, and we think that the return URL, it must solve it, we believe. So we copy this link here. We just add this part to our kind of view here. So we have a partial here. We have this kind of logout. We just append the query string here because we believe that will solve our problem. And we can try it again. We start it. We do login, log out. No, it does not work. Does not really work, but we are logged out, but still does not work. So that is a really confusing thing. We have set the logout path. We tried the redirect URL, does not work. So why does it not work? We set both the logout path and the return URL, both point to the logged out destination, does not work. So why does it not work? Well, so I think the naming of this logout path is really weird because that, as a beginner, hey, I want to log out that path, but it's not. So in our case, the cookie handler will accept this return URL. Okay, so that's a fact. If the cookie handler can accept that one as a parameter where to go after sign out. But the purpose of this logout path is to specify that we only trust this return URL on our logout path. So we can't, try to sign out the user from some other path. So this is more a security feature, but the logout path is a path to your logout page. So if we do that, so basically we need to change it to /logout instead, and then it will work. And if you do that, we will get a 302 redirect back, and location is user /logged out, and it take it from the return URL at the top. Does it make sense? So all we have to do is to get the logout to work is to change is to log out, to point to a page of a logout kind of action. Log out like that. And now, if we try to log out, it will take the return URL query string as a parameter, and we get back to the logged out page. And that is really, I mean, it's really a mind-bending kind of thing, but that is how it works. And this is one of the ways how you can redirect the user. If you do not want to use the query string and return URL, you can actually use either authentication properties to set where to go to next, or you can make a local redirect after sign out as well. You have several options. But I think the key here is that when you look at this kind of logout path, it looks like it should be where to go after logout. I mean, it sounds so obvious, but it's not. So this one is a more security feature. That means that it should point to the URL to your logout controller or logout kind of page. Does it make sense? So that's the kind of secret here. But then the question is, so when we sign out, are we really signed out? What do you think? No, why? Yes. So the problem about that, so I go back to my application, I do sign in. Good. So what now happens if I go to Firefox and I copy the same page? I'm not logged in, as we see, so that's good. So I could actually copy the cookie to Firefox. So I go to Firefox, I go to storage, cookies, I add a new cookie, I name it. It's really a bit tiny here, so let's try again. I name it. No, really? Let's see. It has some old. Yeah, okay. So I just need to kind of paste in the values. I copy the cookie value to Firefox, and I will load the page. And we should see that I'm logged in as Bob. Even though I did not sign in Firefox, I just copied the cookie. So basically, we have two pages, two kind of browsers using the same cookie. So basically, what we have done now is we have copied the authentication cookie from Chrome to Firefox. And because the cookie contains everything about the user, it's all you need to have to authenticate. Okay, that makes sense, I hope. But that also means that if you now sign out from Chrome, I'm signed out, I'm still logged into Firefox. So so when you sign out, you just delete the cookie, but the cookie is still valid for 2 weeks. So if someone steals that cookie, it's game over. So the question is, how can you solve that? Any idea? Okay, you have some flags there, but if you're in a microservice, cloud, you scale out, you have a lot of different machines, this is really good for that, but it's a problem. So to solve that, we don't have time for that today because we're really short of time. But if you want to know how to do that, on my blog, I do have a blog post how you can improve your security by putting cookies on a diet. And that one will explain exactly what to do to ensure that the cookies after you sign out is not valid anymore. And basically, the basic idea is that you need to move your cookie storage to a backend session store instead, and there's built-in support for that in the cookie handler, and you only kind of store a simple kind of primary, like a grid representing that storage in your backend database or in memory or somewhere. And so when you sign out, you delete it from a session store, and that solves the security. And the benefit of doing that is also that you can also achieve, you can have you could display like where are you signed in, for example. So about that. So, and also it allows you to kind of sign out all the users. If you can maybe hacked, you want to kind of kill all the sessions. You can do that by clearing the database. So that blog post is a good kind of talk about that. And so to summarize, we talked about the authentication, request pipeline, and we have the authentication middleware that manage the kind of establishing the claims principle. We saw that we have different handlers, and in those handlers we have 5 core operations: authenticate, challenge, forbid, sign in, and sign out. And the responsibility of the authentication system is to look at the incoming request, try to establish a user that then can be displayed on the page and gain access to your resources. So I will be here for afterwards if you have any questions. The presentation and code will be on my GitHub, and there's a QR code for the presentation. And also do check out my blog and my training on the team data. Thank you very much.